To discuss China's investment from Islamabad is Musharraf Zaidi, a leading Pakistani columnist and government advisor. From Beijing, we have Jie Dong, a senior international affairs researcher at the China Institute of International Studies. And with me in Washington, D.C. is Andrew Small, author of the book, The China-Pakistan Axis, Asia's New Geopolitics. Thanks to all of you for being with us. Andrew, let me start with you. We heard a host of descriptions there on this relationship, that it's an all-weather friendship, that they're close allies. You've written a book on the subject. How would you characterize this relationship?
You have a lot of this kind of sometimes even hyperbolic sounding language between the two sides, but I think a lot of it is actually quite well warranted. It's probably the closest friendship that the two sides have. It's not a formal alliance, it's never been a formal alliance, but it's been a friendship that's been remarkably resilient across changing geopolitical conditions over the decades and changing political conditions in both countries. It's probably the friendship that China has that's least dependent on one particular government being in power at any one time. But it's always been a relationship that's been defined by its security and military ties, and it traditionally had a very regional focus. India was the external actor that in a sense brought the two sides together. The economic dimensions of the relationship have traditionally been much weaker, and Xi Jinping's visit this week I think is probably the biggest effort that there's ever been to transition the relationship into an even more broad-based one, and also a relationship that becomes less focused around the region itself, but also becomes part of China's plans looking beyond South Asia to Central Asia, to the Middle East, and even towards China's global ambitions. Right.
Jie Dong in Beijing, why is Pakistan important to China?
It's our neighbor, very close neighbor. We share the same border. Actually, over the decades, Pakistan has supported China bilaterally and multilaterally at the United Nations and its various agencies on very key issues of China's interests and concerns. For example, on the question, China's core questions, interests of Taiwan, Tibet, and all these questions. So Pakistan is regarded as a very close, reliable partner friendship, and also we call Pakistan a brother. So economically, yes, Pakistan is important to China, but more important politically and strategically, also Pakistan is a very close friend of China.
Musharraf, how do you view this relationship? How does Pakistan see the relationship? Does it see it as a strategic one that counters the influence of India, or is there a lot more to it?
I think the Pakistan-China relationship is much, much bigger and broader than simply one that's defined or informed by the fear or the paranoia, legitimate or otherwise, of India. I think, you know, China and Pakistan, obviously there's a strategic element to the relationship, but I also think that there's a lot of history between these two countries supporting each other on the international stage, supporting each other both in plain view, but also behind the scenes, behind closed doors, behind curtains. Andrew's written very, very clearly and cogently about this in the last couple of weeks, about the fact that for all the rhetoric that you see, and you know, a lot of it is actually true, there's very few examples of the kind of closeness between two states that you see between China and Pakistan, especially when you contrast it with the fact that in terms of people-to-people relations, while there's certainly no animosity of any sort, but there isn't all that much in terms of interaction. There's been increasing numbers of Chinese workers and experts and technicians that have been living in Pakistan, and the number of Pakistani students in China has increased exponentially over the last few years. But traditionally, these are not two people that are very close to each other, but it is two states that are very close to each other. So obviously there is a strategic element to it, but it's been growing far beyond that. And I think that if anything, rather than seeing the strategic element of this as something that is anti-India, I think that for the last decade or more, China's been encouraging Pakistan to become closer to India, using its own example of a dramatically increased bilateral trade with India to show Pakistan that whilst there will be bilateral disputes between India and Pakistan, that shouldn't stop those two countries from trading with each other. And I think as the Modi administration in India matures and realizes the importance of taking on a similar approach to global affairs as the one that China's adopted, I think the space for Pakistan to do more with India is also going to grow.
Andrew, this is the first visit by a Chinese leader to Pakistan in 9 years. Now, given that this is a close relationship, why has it taken so long?
Well, a lot of the relationship isn't transacted through these big bilateral visits. Of course, with so many of the sensitivities around the military dimensions of the relationship between the two sides, there's a huge amount that gets navigated behind closed doors. The security support that China's provided to Pakistan, arms sales, cooperation on nuclear activities, there's a lot of these issues that are not necessarily as amenable to big sort of celebratory joint occasions and things. In some ways, the big bilateral visits have actually been a little bit disappointing. But you had an important visit from Li Keqiang as well, the Chinese premier, just in the transition period when the new government was taking office, in which some of these plans for Pakistan to play this role in the Silk Road economic belt and maritime Silk Road started to be laid down. And there's a huge amount of bilateral traffic between the two sides outside the parameters of these big set-piece occasions. Of course, this visit was also delayed. It was supposed to happen last September, and because of the protests in Islamabad and therefore the difficulties for the Chinese president to physically move around the capital city, the visit was ultimately cancelled at the time and has been pushed back 1 or 2 times since then. So there've also been some practical difficulties with actually pinning this visit down.
Jia Zedong, how is President Xi's visit being seen in China? I mean, is there a lot of support for this relationship with Pakistan? How do the Chinese people see it? How does the media see it, for one?
Absolutely. You know, the people here in China support, as I believe it's fully, China's relation with Pakistan and send their blessings to the president's visit to Pakistan. You know, have followed very closely the commentaries in Chinese media, not only in Chinese media, but also in the blogosphere and on all those bloggers in China. They have very warm words about Pakistan. They call, actually they have a special phrase for Pakistan, a close friend. They call it a Pakistani ironclad brother. So they have in Chinese called Batie. It's a very warm kind of word, expression of their affection for the bilateral relations. So actually, the bilateral relation enjoys a very broad and deep-rooted basis of public support. And that's, you know, not so usual in China's relations with many other countries, as broad and deep-rooted support that the bilateral relation has enjoyed. So if you read the Chinese bloggers' postings, you'll guess, you know, the atmosphere of China-Pakistani relations. So that's, you know, a blessing, a plus for the bilateral relations. And they support China's aid to Pakistan, and they welcome Pakistan's support in China's, you know, fight against terrorism, and they support China-Pakistani cooperation on economic fields, including the China-Pakistan economic corridor, which will attract billions of US dollars of trade from China, hopefully in the future from other countries too, when the economic condition improves in Pakistan. So it's not only good for China and Pakistan, it is also good for other countries. That's what's been felt by the people here in China.
Musharraf, looking at the investment that President Xi brings with him, $46 billion in planned infrastructure and energy investment. This is not just a photo op. This is not just, you know, for television cameras. There's some serious purpose behind it. How is that being seen in Pakistan, the fact that there's going to be this boost into the Pakistani economy?
I think quite rightly it's being seen as potentially transformational. Pakistan's been through some very tough times over the last decade. Some of the troubles that we face, many of the troubles that we face are a creation of problems we've had before, mistakes that we might have made in the past. And sometimes when you dig yourself into a hole, it's difficult to get out. But I think that CPEC, the whole China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, is being seen by the political leadership in Pakistan and the military leadership as an opportunity for Pakistan to construct, with Chinese support, this infrastructure and in a sense, jumpstart Pakistan's true potential as a regional economic power. Obviously not of the same stature as China or India, but certainly with a population of 200 million people and with a very diverse sort of mix of assets and resources that it has at its disposal, particularly the very specific geography that Pakistan has. Pakistan is nowhere near reaching its potential. And I think that, this visit by President Xi and the investment that's being talked about is being seen by virtually everybody in Pakistan as a great opportunity for Pakistan to sort of fix some of the problems that it's had and get on track and become part of this broader vision, broader Chinese vision, but really broader regional vision of economic interdependence and interoperability.